There's a lot of shouting on this album. Full on, non-stop, aggro, brah. That's nice. God hates us all. Oh, wow. I forgot how brutal this album is. I would have known about Slayer for some time. You know, they were a band. If you were even remotely interested in any guitar-based music at all, you knew who Slayer was. They'd been around for quite a while. At the point when this album came out, I was aware of them, but up until this point, I hadn't really heard anything that I really identified with. I think thrash at this point, you know, in the late 90s, had kind of run its course for the most part. I think people had kind of got exhausted by it, kind of understandably. It's a pretty exhausting genre of music, in the best way possible. But, you know, there was a lot of musical shifts that were happening at the time, trends were changing, new metal was in, thrash metal was kind of out, and felt a little bit dated by this point. I guess Slayer recognized that, and was sort of, I mean, with their previous album, Diabolus and Musica, they were kind of dipping their toes into that new metal tempo and tuning and stuff. I don't believe that album was particularly well received. Slayer fans, hardcore, old head Slayer fans, are very, typically, quite purist fans of both Slayer and thrash in general. And I think Diabolus and Musica rub people the wrong way. I can understand why. And then I think with God Hates Us All, my personal opinion, God Hates Us All is when they really struck gold with adapting to current trends but still retaining their core sound. This album really, really worked for me. It was a surprise as well, because in my mind at the time, Slayer were kind of old metal. They were outdated. I know it's a stupid thing to say, but that's just how it was at the time. And then this album dropped, and I've been a fan ever since. Seen them twice live. I caught them on their Farewell 2019 tour. Yeah, I've loved Slayer ever since. And I'm actually, controversially perhaps, I am a big fan of their later albums. Repentless was a bit of a going out on a whimper rather than going out with a bang kind of album. A bit disappointing. But yeah, this for me is the best thing they ever did. I'm already anticipating angry old school Slayer fans doing this in the comments, telling me how stupid and far too young I am. But that's fine. You're entitled to do that. But yeah, this album was released on September the 11th, 2001. Yes, that September 11th, 2001. The same day, which is kind of chilling, considering the message. I mean, the literally the name of the album, God Hates Us All, to come out on that same day. Oh man, who could have foreseen that? Released on September 11th, whatever. Produced by Rick Rubin of this many artists' fame. This was at a time when they had departed ways with the original drummer. Paul Bostaph came on board and gave Slayer a bit of a different feel. I find Paul Bostaff's drumming, my personal opinion is that his drumming kind of feels like everything's about to derail, and it's like just holding on structurally, and I like that. Maybe a lot of people didn't, but according to Wikipedia, I'm quoting word for word, drummer Paul Bostaff follows a simple rule suggested by Rick Rubin in the studio. The perfect take is the one that felt like it was going to fall apart but never did. Which is exactly how I felt about this album for so many years, so that ties in to my feeling of his drumming on this album, which I think is fantastic. We'll get into it. There's some very, very unconventional drum patterns and everything. I think it's chef's kiss. As you may know about me, I'm a big fan of Korn and nu metal in general, but specifically Korn. And in this album, they did use 7-string guitars for a couple of songs, which for a long time, until I started reading up on this a long time ago, I sort of had that feeling, but I couldn't put my finger on why it sounded so good to me, and that's why. So when I got this album, I do remember the day I brought it home and put it in the CD player. Rather than me tell you what happened, let me just borrow some Breaking Bad universe footage to give you a dramatic recreation of what happened that day at my dad's house.
Yeah, back! Yes! Turn that off! Turn it off! Turn it off! What?
It's such a good gym album. It's probably in my top 10 gym albums of all time because it basically doesn't stop pounding you in the head throughout the whole album. At the time, this was very much what I was looking for, and I didn't realize that Slayer, a band who I had been aware of for such a long time, would be the one to deliver the goods to me. Because, you know, I knew them for all their old classics from like the 80s, and I honestly didn't realize that they had it in them to do something this intense. So the personnel on this album is Tom Araya on bass and vocals, Kerry King on guitar, Jeff Hanneman on guitars, R.I.P., and Paul Bostaff on drums. Executive producer was Rick Rubin. It had a mixed reception from what I can see. In the UK, it got to number 2 in the UK in rock and metal albums. US Billboard 200, it got to number 28. I don't remember how I came across this album, honestly. I don't think anyone showed it to me. That's actually one thing. A lot of albums that I grew to love in my formative teenage years were albums, or artists at the very least, that other people showed me. And somehow I was the one to show this album to others who, presumably similar to me, were like, oh, Slayer, that's for older people. We're like 12, 13, 14, whatever. It's probably not for us. And I showed people, and they were impressed. If nothing else, this particular album, it really fit in with the new metal and everything that everyone was listening to at the time. Would I call this a new metal album? No, not really. I don't think so. It doesn't have, you know, it's more groove metal than anything else. If I was to say one specific artist of like the new metal, groove metal era was an influence on this album, I'd say probably something like Soulfly. I do hear a bit of Soulfly riffing in this album, which is a good thing. Soulfly riffs are usually pretty bloody good. Yeah, when I went to a festival in 2019 on Slayer's farewell tour, we'll see about that. I got talking to some old dude. He must have been in his like late 50s, early 60s maybe. I mean, he asked me what my favorite Slayer album was, and I was like, you'll probably hate me for saying this, but it's God Hates Us All. And he was like, no, I totally understand why that would be. Like, I think that's a great album too. I was like, okay, really? Wow. You know, I kind of, maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's just a perception thing, but Slayer fans in my head, at least the old school Slayer fans, are they seem reluctant to change or to adaptation. Maybe that's just me, I don't know, but I always got the feeling that this album was not loved by old school Slayer fans. Old school Slayer fans, please, in the comments, tell me your feelings on this album. Yeah, there was only one music video for this album, as far as I'm aware, which was Bloodline. I remember Bloodline being on MTV, and again, I used to watch a lot of MTV or Kerrang or whatever, and I do remember Bloodline being played, hearing the sound of it, and then seeing the name Slayer underneath. I was like, this is Slayer, this Bloodline off album God Hates Us All, and I was like, really? This is Slayer? This doesn't sound like the Slayer that I know of. This sounds a little bit more like my kind of thing, and yeah, it was. That was my first glimpse into this album, and then I got the album, and yeah, been a Slayer fan ever since. But I think, in terms of intro, that's about as much as I can say. Let's get into it. Yeah, the intro, Darkness of Christ, is a pretty good intro. I will confess, most of the time I just skip it to get straight into the first song. I do like how it feels like the album is like emerging out of a crack in the ground with fire coming out of it, and like blood and stuff just flying out of it. It's pretty cool. And it's so distorted. Nicely warms you up for being slammed in the face by Disciple. Yeah, every time Disciple gets going, and Tom starts screaming immediately at the top of his voice, it reminds me straight away how heavy this album is. Within the first 20 seconds, 30 seconds, it's full power, and it just basically doesn't stop for the whole album. You know, my introduction to metal was kind of Korn and Slipknot and Limp Bizkit and all those kind of bands, and so guitar solos weren't really part of that music, and so I really wasn't used to it. Guitar solos in themselves, even now, kind of make me think of, you know, Iron Maiden or old school Slayer or whatever, and it wasn't really part of my metal. My metal didn't have guitar solos. We didn't need them. They were kind of an older trend. But the guitar solos on this totally fit. Of course they do, because it's Slayer. You can't really have a Slayer album without copious guitar solos. But I think even they were aware that, you know, we want to do guitar solos, but will the people accept guitar solos in this time period? So they keep them relatively minimal. And for me, this has the perfect amount of guitar solos. Even going in straight into the first song. Yes, you can have guitar solos, that's fine, just it doesn't have to go on for 4 minutes, you know? You can have it as an accent to the song. It doesn't need to be a primary focus of the song, though. The bit, is it a chorus? I don't know. The bit where he's going, I never said I wanted to be God's disciple, that's so heavy, man. And again, we're 2 minutes into the first song. It's like, Jesus Christ. I can't tell you how receptive to this album I was when I put it in the CD player for the first time. Jesus. And Tom is just screaming like he's never screamed before. Like, Slayer obviously had screaming in it before, whereas this is full-on screaming his guts out. And again, that was the trend at the time. You know, you listen to Slipknot's first album, Corey Taylor's basically destroying his vocal cords. And Tom, I guess, realized he needed to step it up a bit, and he did. He doesn't fall short at all. The adaptation of Slayer to modern times metal was perfect. And teenage me, hearing the words, I reject this fucking race, I reject this fucking place, or whatever those lyrics are, couldn't relate more to that. God send death. Yeah, so it starts 44 seconds in when the beat starts hitting you repeatedly. It's a very thrash beat. You know, that goes for like 16 bars or 32 bars or whatever. And then it switches to a more contemporary beat. It's still thrash, but it also is throwing in like new metal style beats at the same time, which I think balances out everything perfectly. Yeah, the clawing at the eyes of God bit, that's pretty new metal. That not the lyrics, just that section of the song is very dirgy and bleak and nihilistic. That's the tone of this album overall, I think. And again, towards the end of the song, the last third of the song, guitar solos galore, but that's fine, you can have that at the end of the song, just not for the entire song. Yeah, from the first second till the end of the song is just non-stop, and there's, you know, a bit of a gap, but it doesn't last very long, and it just comes back even harder than it did before. New Faith. Yeah, I think the first time I heard this album, New Faith, was where I was like, okay, yeah, I get what they're doing, and I like it a lot. The riff, the main riff in this, dun 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 dun, a little bit generic, sure, but does that make it bad? No, I don't think so. It fits perfectly with everything they're trying to do on this new album. The bit in the middle where he goes, I keep the Bible in a pool of blood so that none of its lies can affect me. Just cutting out everything and leaving that in. I don't know what to say exactly about that, apart from the fact that I like it a lot. And then the part of the song, the half of the song after that is just full on, non-stop, aggro, brah. It's so intense, man. This album really feels like an album that's separating the men from the boys, you know? Linkin Park's Hybrid Theory, I did that. High praise from me, but in terms of like blood-pumping, intense, muscular, pure metal, like I don't see why anyone would have a problem with this. Cast Down. Yeah, again, the mixing up the thrash metal, like the snare on the downbeat type drumming, mixing in with slower tempo, more contemporary drum styles. I think it fits seamlessly. I've never really thought about it too much before. Again, I haven't sat down and analysed this album before. This is me doing it now as I'm talking to you. And it all blends so seamlessly. I think this is just going to be a running theme throughout the whole album, that the way they adapted to the new sound of metal at the time was so well done. Yeah, the riffs in this album, they're probably my favourite Slayer riffs of all time. I know, it's a heinous thing to say, because old school Slayer is sacred. Fine, I get it. I've heard a lot of complaints about the guitar tone on this album, which I have never understood. For me, this is some of their best guitar tone ever. If that's how you feel, maybe you can explain to me what the problem is, because I don't get it, man. Threshold. The beginning of Threshold is the real strong sign of evidence of them adapting to what was going on at the time. The noise gate on the guitar, they would never have used that before. And the guitar riff itself kind of reminds me of what Mudvayne were doing at the time. It sounds quite similar, and I was a big fan of Mudvayne's LD50, not their later stuff. And I was like, okay, Slayer is kind of sounding like a band that I'm a big fan of right now. 2 thumbs up. And the drum beat, when the drums kick in after a few seconds, that is what I was referring to earlier when I said about the unconventional drum patterns. What Paul Bostaph is doing on the snare, it still confuses me. How the guitar riff is choppy and kind of all over the place, and then to make that bizarre drum beat and then make them both fit together, that's pretty clever. Yeah, this is probably the most new metal song on the album so far, at least. The verses in this are quite new metal. Shortest song on the album, but honestly, probably one of my favorites. Again, the lyrics are so just absolutely nihilistic and antagonistic, confrontational, and for, 14-year-old me, just discovering basically what testosterone is, this was perfect. It's weird to have such strong nostalgia for something this intense and this brutal, but I do. It gives me a warm feeling, even though it's very cold certainly in its lyrical messaging, and the sound of it overall is very chunky and very sharp and spiky. Puts a warm feeling in my heart, man. Exile. Yeah, about a minute in, it goes into the real thrash circle pit beat. I'm completely here for it. I really wish I could see Slayer just perform this entire album, one song after another, for the whole show. That would rip. That would be probably quite dangerous, actually. Yeah, and I think even the lyrical tone that this album has was probably a bit of a switch from earlier Slayer stuff. Earlier Slayer songs are talking about war and death and evil in the world and all this kind of stuff, whereas this is again the much more new metal kind of messaging, where it's messaging directly to you and about me to you. It's more introspective is not quite the right word, but you know what I'm saying. Like, I have a message I want to deliver to you about how I'm feeling. Diablos in Musica maybe touched on that a bit. I haven't listened to that album as much as this one. You self-righteous fuck, give me a reason not to rip your fucking face off. Why don't you take a good look in these eyes, because I'm the one who's going to tear your fucking heart out. That's pretty direct, and I'm here for it. I love these lyrics. I know they are not particularly deep or intellectual or anything, but I don't care. This is exactly my kind of antagonist music. 7 Faces. Yeah, 7 Faces is pretty new metal. I think of the songs on the album, we're now at track 8. I would say 7 Faces so far is probably the least remarkable song. It's the most meandering of the songs so far. Yeah, they were definitely paying attention to Slipknot's first album when this came out. I feel like they heard Slipknot by Slipknot and were like, I think we need to do what they're doing, partly because it's badass, and also because it's clearly the thing that's getting a lot of traction right now. Is that a criticism of Slayer? Is it wrong for a band to adapt to new things that are going on? I don't know. All I know is whatever they did around this time worked for me, and they gained at least one new fan because of it. Bloodline. Yeah, okay, Bloodline does, if I visualize the music video, does have a lot of nostalgia for me. I do remember that coming out and thinking, wow, Slayer are a lot cooler than I thought they were. And that's not to say that I thought Slayer were not good. I didn't identify with them. And this was the closest they got at that time to me changing my mind on that. They changed my mind. And the video was pretty cool, pretty edgy, lots of blood. and a cute little kitten in the video. That's nice. I love the guitar dissonance in the chorus and the main riff. Dun 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 dun. Very simple riff, which Slayer is not particularly well known for. But this was the era of simple riffs. The dissonance in it and the down-tunedness of it really works for their sound, I think. Yeah, it's interesting that they chose Bloodline as the music video. It clearly worked, on me at least, but if they really wanted to attract kids like me, I would have gone with Disciple or Threshold, or Exile, for that matter. Bloodline is not my favourite track on the album. It's kind of the most different track on the album in some senses, in that it's not that brutal as a lot of the rest of the album is, and maybe that's why. Maybe they wanted something not to scare people off too much. But at the same time, it's Slayer, and the music video is full of blood. So if you don't want to scare people off, what are you doing? I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Deviance. Okay, Deviance I actually don't have a lot to say about. It doesn't really do much at this point on the album. We're at track 10, and I don't know if this song needs to be here particularly. I do like the effect on the guitar, the do no 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 no, but the overall song doesn't really. The structure's kind of all over the place. I'm not really sure what they were intending with this song. It's not a mosh pit song. It's not a circle pit song. It's not especially heavy after everything else we've heard so far. Like I said earlier, this is an album that I listen to in the gym, and obviously when I'm in the gym, I'm in the zone, I'm not really thinking, but sometimes I will occasionally skip a song if it's not fitting with what I'm doing, and I think Deviance is probably one of those songs on this album, one of the very few ones that I will actually skip. However, Warzone is ridiculous. Warzone, I believe when I first, listened to this album 2 or 3 or 4 times, Warzone was the one where I'm like, holy shit, this is insane. The drumming on the toms that happens in this song, it doesn't sound real, man. It doesn't sound like a human being is actually capable of doing that. It's so quick. And again, it kind of has that same the energy that I was talking about how it all feels like it's just about to fall off the rails, and it doesn't. And that's the excitement of this whole album. And this particular song, oh god, it's so good. Regardless of your opinion about Slipknot, their first album is objectively heavy as fuck at some parts. When the album came out in '99, for me that was the heaviest music could ever possibly get. Obviously in 2025 things are much different now, but it was still pretty intense for what it was. And Warzone, I think, matches it, if not surpasses it. Yet absolute chaos Warzone. This is my favourite song on the album. Always has been. And even after all these years, it's still absurdly heavy. The first lyric on the song is explosion. Like that's it. It's an explosion of a song. Here comes the pain. I feel like possibly some of the criticism that Slayer got with this album is that compared to their earlier music, this would have been very, very easy to play. Relatively speaking, because earlier Slayer was insanely fast tempo, and a lot of this isn't. Like the tempo is possibly even half what they can play. Here Comes the Pain, it kind of demonstrates that. The slower tempo makes the riffs easier to play. It works for me. It worked for me at the time because this was very close to what I was listening to at the time. This was very close to what was trending at the time. And I can see old school Slayer fans seeing this as kind of low effort in some respects. Like, I could play some of these riffs and I don't even play guitar. But does it make it bad? No. Again, having guitar solos in the third of the song is absolutely fine. You've already done some stuff, and it just kind of extends the song towards the final chorus or breakdown or whatever. You can have guitar solos, that's fine, just in a healthy portion. Payback. Okay, what I was just saying about the tempos being slower, I take that back with Payback, because this song goes so fast compared to most of the other songs. I love the chorus in Payback. The lyrics, I know the lyrics, but I want to just read them out to you so that you can appreciate them for what they truly are. The chorus, tear your fucking eyes out, rip your fucking flesh off, beat you till you're just a fucking lifeless carcass, fuck you in your progress, watch me fucking regress, you were made to take the fall, now you're nothing, payback's a bitch, motherfucker. That's pretty hardcore. I mean, in every sense. Like, that's like hardcore band lyrics. And again, this is not your typical Slayer lyrics from albums previous. Like I said, I'm just repeating myself at this point, but this was so... They were telling me what I wanted to hear. Maybe they weren't telling everyone what they wanted to hear, but if they wanted to reach a new audience, which they clearly were trying to, absolutely perfect, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, Payback is one of my other favourite songs on the album. It's a very good final song. I was going to say a perfect full stop, or period to you Americans out there, but it's a good exclamation point to the album, I think, is a better way of putting it. There's a lot of shouting on this album. So much shouting. At the end of a shouted statement, you'd have an exclamation point at the end, and that's what Payback feels like to me. Okay, I feel like I haven't really, compared to other albums, I haven't had much to say about this album aside from I really like all of it. Deviance being like the only song that I'd really... Maybe Deviance and Here Comes the Pain being the only songs that could live without, possibly. But the album's pretty short. It's 42 minutes, so that's a very, very good album length, especially for something this intense. I really don't have much bad to say about the album overall. I think the production is super crisp, the drumming's amazing, the riffs are exactly what I look for in basically meathead metal, which is what this is to me. Like, this is perfect gym music. There's no gaps, there's no melodic bits that I feel like make me want to chill out or anything. I love this album. Slayer fans, by all means let me know how wrong I am for having this opinion, but for me this is by far their best album. I am obviously biased because this was the first one I bought, and it came out at just the time when I was looking for this, essentially. And Slayer brought the goods. And since this album, I've been a fan ever since, and I did see them in 2005, and that was a lot of fun. Compared to my other album reviews, I don't really feel like I've said a lot on this. The recording's gone a little bit shorter than I usually do. Honestly, it's just no criticism, and there's not a lot of variety on this album, so it's hard for me to compare songs to each other that much. God Hates Us All by Slayer is a solid 9 for me. Like I said, there's a couple of songs that I could do without. If you cut off Deviance and Here Comes the Pain, might be much closer to a 10 of an album. It needs to be in a specific environment, this album. I'm not just going to stick it on randomly if I'm chilling out at home. But when I need it, it's always there. And sometimes I do. There's a very specific itch this album scratches for me that very few other albums do. The album after this was Christ Illusion, which was leaning more back into the typical Slayer sound. It didn't do it for me as much. Obviously I still like it, but this one was just... it's just perfect timing, perfect sound. I think I am done. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know how you feel about this album in the comments. Tell me your favourite songs off the album. I'm going to go now, but I still haven't thought of how to end videos yet, so I'm just going to say, go away. And the bit halfway through where he goes, I keep the Bible in a pool of blood so that none... The bit in the middle where he goes, I keep the Bible in a pool of blood so that's none of... Fucking hell.